In this video, we're going to discuss 12 reasons why we might want to conduct a force assessment on someone we're working with. First up, benchmarking. We might want to understand how an individual stacks up against other people. So are they strong or weak for a rugby player? Are they developing good levels of lower limb explosive strength for a javelin thrower? How are their general strength levels for their age group or occupation? Knowing this information can help guide training and exercise advice, selection decisions in appropriate sports and occupations, and key performance indicators for development programs. Next up, evaluating current performance levels and identifying strengths and weaknesses. Somewhat linked to benchmarking, we can use force assessments to identify an individual's current performance level and understand which areas need focus or development. Next, we have developing and rationalizing an appropriate intervention. So once we know someone's results and have interpreted them, we can use them to support specific programming decisions to ensure that we are giving them the best and most appropriate support that we can. Then we have evaluating changes in performance over time in response to training or detraining. We want to see if someone's getting fitter and responding in the way we want them to as a result of our program. The right force assessments, tracked over time, can help us evaluate the success or failure of a program so that we can maximize its future impact. It will also help us evaluate someone's engagement with that program, because if they don't do it, they won't improve. Or help us understand levels of detraining if that individual has had some time out. Then we have evaluating injury risk. Some force assessments may link to common injuries, either in general or for a specific sport or task. So with the right assessment, we might be able to identify issues before they happen. Developing injury risk reduction strategies. Linked to the previous point, if we identify injury risk due to poor performance in a specific force assessment, we'll have a good insight into which programming solutions may resolve the current weaknesses, thereby allowing us to reduce injury risk. Evaluating current performance levels post-injury. If we have some baseline force data from an individual when they were healthy, at an appropriate time during their recovery, we can evaluate them against that previous data to determine how much and what type of work may need to be done to support them in returning to full fitness. Informing rehabilitation interventions. Linked to the previous point, if we understand where someone's post-injury assessment sits and how they compare to previous scores, we can use the result to target specific interventions which will aid recovery. Tracking progress and recovery post-injury. Once we have started the rehabilitation process, evaluate an individual's performance changes over time, similar to how we would with a training program for a healthy individual, to ensure the program is effective and we are moving in the right direction. Evaluating return to play status. Before we allow an athlete to return to sport, we are going to want to make sure that it's safe for them to do so. If we can evaluate their force data against known benchmarks for that sport or previous data for that individual, we can use that data to inform our decisions about the potential risk levels and whether or not they're going to be safe to return to either training or competition. Monitoring readiness and fatigue. If we use a force assessment very regularly, we can also use it to evaluate fatigue and readiness. An example of this would be if we got someone to perform a counter movement jump at the start of every day, and we saw a sudden drop off in score on a certain day. This might be an indicator that they were fatigued and might need some rest or a lighter session. Educating individuals you work with. If communicated well, all of these applications can also form the base for good discussions with an individual being assessed and an opportunity to educate them and build buy-in and trust. However, when using force assessments, we need to ensure that we are using the most appropriate force assessment for the issues in question. Otherwise, they can also lead us down the wrong path. Not only that, but force assessments by themselves are often not enough to address any of the actionable points discussed in this video. The results need to be combined with other information as part of the reasoning process. So force assessments by themselves will not give you the answer, but they will certainly help you and give you some really useful clues. So in conclusion, force assessments can help us with benchmarking, evaluating current performance levels and identifying strengths and weaknesses, developing and rationalizing an appropriate intervention, evaluating changes in performance over time in response to training or detraining, evaluating injury risk, developing injury risk reduction strategies, evaluating current performance levels post-injury, informing rehabilitation interventions, tracking progress and recovery post-injury, evaluating the return to play status, monitoring readiness and fatigue, and educating individuals you work with.